Olivia Wilson led a life that could only be described as perfectly predictable. Her days were a seamless routine of working at a prestigious publishing house in downtown Chicago and enjoying quiet evenings at home. Olivia loved books, not just editing them for work, but reading them late into the night, immersing herself in other people's stories as a temporary escape from her own. Unmarried, childless, and surrounded by a small but loyal circle of friends, Olivia found joy in life's simple pleasures. Her morning coffee from a favorite cafe, peaceful walks through the park, and occasional get-togethers with her friends. Everything changed one evening when a coworker invited her to a charity gala held to raise funds for the local library. Initially, Olivia hesitated. She disliked large social events where she had to make small talk with strangers. But after some convincing, she decided to go. That night, under the glow of crystal chandeliers and the soft clinking of champagne glasses, she met Ryan Gardner. Ryan was magnetic, alto, confident, and blessed with a disarming smile. He approached Olivia with an easy charm, asking if she too believed that books were still the best friends one could have, even in the digital age. His choice of topic struck a chord with Olivia, who was amazed that someone at such an event could so effortlessly touch upon something so dear to her. He introduced himself as a real estate agent who loved helping people find their dream homes. His attention to detail, polished manners, and natural charisma immediately drew her in. Their connection blossomed quickly. Ryan was everything Olivia had ever dreamed of in a romantic partner. He was attentive, curious about her life and her work, and even asked about the book she was editing. He proposed they read her favorite novels together. Around him, Olivia felt special in a way she hadn't for years. A few weeks after their first meeting, Ryan invited her to dinner at an upscale restaurant and later surprised her with a set of vintage books she had longed to buy but could never justify due to their steep price. Olivia's friends, particularly her best friend and attorney Clara Davis, watched this whirlwind romance with a cautious eye. Clara was someone who had a knack for noticing the small details that others overlooked. She couldn't quite reconcile how Ryan seemed to have so much time and energy to devote to Olivia and why his past felt oddly too clean. His answers to questions about his family or friends were always vague, and Clara found that unsettling. On several occasions, she hinted to Olivia to be more careful, but Olivia brushed off her concerns. "Clara, I know you're trying to protect me, but I'm happy for the first time in years. Don't I deserve that?" Olivia said one evening when Clara tried to broach the topic of Ryan. 3 months into their relationship, Ryan proposed that they move in together. He had found a charming house in a picturesque suburb, a perfect spot to start a new chapter of their lives. Olivia was thrilled. She had always dreamed of living away from the city's hustle and bustle, and the house seemed tailor-made for her. Bright rooms, a large library, and a cozy garden. At the same time, Olivia began to notice that her friends were becoming distant. They didn't understand her decisions, and Clara outright told her that she didn't trust Ryan. Olivia, however, convinced herself that perhaps her friends simply couldn't accept her happiness or were afraid of losing their connection with her. The turning point came when Ryan suggested they spend a weekend at a rented lake house in Wisconsin. He assured her it would be a romantic getaway, a chance for them to unplug and enjoy each other's company. Olivia was ecstatic at the idea. She envisioned evenings by the fireplace, tranquil walks by the lake, and a much-needed break from the routine. What Olivia didn't realize was that this weekend would change her life forever. As she packed her suitcase, she imagined only warmth and happiness ahead, unaware that with every step, she was walking deeper into a carefully laid trap. The rented lake house in Wisconsin looked like something straight out of a magazine cover. Nestled away from other cottages, it was surrounded by dense trees whose bare branches in winter revealed a clear view of the frozen lake. From the very morning, Ryan was in an excellent mood. He made Olivia breakfast with homemade waffles, her favorite, set fresh flowers on the table, and suggested they take a walk down to the lake later in the day. It all felt like a perfect dream come true, as though someone had plucked the most idyllic scene from Olivia's imagination and brought it to life. Ryan was attentive to every detail, as if determined to make this weekend flawless. They spent hours reading her favorite novel together by the fireplace, savoring the silence broken only by the occasional crackle of the wood burning in the hearth. "You know, I could live like this forever," Ryan said one evening, wrapping his arms around her. In those moments, Olivia felt like she had found her dream man. But on the third day of their stay, an unexpected turn disrupted the tranquility. Over breakfast, Ryan casually mentioned that he needed to leave for the day. Supposedly, an urgent meeting with a client had come up, something he couldn't reschedule. Olivia was disappointed but chose to use the time to tidy up the house. Creating order in her surroundings always brought her a sense of calm. While cleaning, Olivia came across Ryan's suitcase in the bedroom. At first, she only intended to move it out of the way, but it was slightly ajar. Her habit of neatness prompted her to close it properly, but as she reached for the latch, her attention was caught by an envelope lying on top of his belongings. It seemed as though it had been placed there in a hurry. She hesitated for a moment, torn between respecting Ryan's privacy and her growing curiosity. In the end, curiosity won. Inside the envelope were documents that didn't make much sense at first glance. One name stood out, William Crawford, a name she had never heard before. There were also lists of names and addresses, all of them women's names connected to different cities. Something about the documents gave her a strange sense of unease, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Her instincts told her that this was no ordinary paperwork. She photographed the documents with her phone and sent them to Clara using an encrypted messaging app, adding a brief note. "Can you take a look at this? I found these papers in Ryan's suitcase. Something feels off." That evening, as darkness settled over the lake, Olivia began to feel an odd shift in the atmosphere of the house. It was as though someone was watching her through the windows, though she saw no one when she checked. She tried to brush it off as her imagination playing tricks on her, but the feeling of being watched lingered, growing stronger with each passing hour. At one point, she thought she heard a faint rustling sound near the front door. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to look through the peephole. No one was there. Everything seemed normal, yet the fear refused to dissipate. She added another lock to the door and turned on every light in the house. Later that night, she received a reply from Clara. The message was short but urgent. "Olivia, this is serious. I'm looking into it now, but these papers seem like more than just random documents. Are you sure you're safe?" That message only deepened Olivia's anxiety. She spent the night sitting by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, listening to every creak and groan of the house. Even the wind, which rattled the branches of the trees outside, made her flinch. Deep down, Olivia knew that something about this house no longer felt safe. She didn't yet realize that this night would only be the beginning of the danger now creeping into her life. Clara Davis was not someone who panicked easily. She had a sharp mind and a steady demeanor, even when situations turned tense. But this time, as she studied the photographs Olivia had sent her from the lake house, she felt a chilling unease settle in her chest. The documents found in Ryan's suitcase told a disturbing story. Lists of women's names paired with addresses. Digging into her legal databases, Clara began cross-referencing the names. What she discovered left her breathless. Several of the women on the list had been reported missing over the past 3 years. On the surface, the cases had no apparent connection. Different cities, different circumstances. But now there was a common thread. Their names appeared in the very papers Olivia had stumbled upon. Clara wasted no time contacting a trusted detective, Mike Randall, who worked in the missing persons division and had a reputation for solving even the most complex cases. She forwarded him the documents and explained the situation in detail. Mike took it seriously and began investigating immediately. Within hours, he called her back, his tone grave. "Clara, this is bigger than you think. The name William Crawford has shown up in several unsolved cases. It's not new to us," Mike said. Clara's stomach dropped. She realized they had limited time. She sent Olivia another message, but this time she didn't hold back. "You need to be very careful. Ryan might not be who he says he is. The police are already looking into this, but you need to stay alert." Meanwhile, Olivia sat in the rented lake house trying to process Clara's warnings. Her instincts told her something was wrong, but her heart resisted the idea that Ryan, her Ryan, could be involved in anything sinister. This was the man who had listened to her talk about books for hours, who had gifted her vintage novels and planned a future with her. How could he possibly have anything to hide? Clara kept trying to call her, but Olivia replied only with a text. "I just need to talk to him when he gets back. I need to figure this out myself. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Clara wasn't convinced, but she didn't want to push Olivia too hard. As Mike delved deeper into the name William Crawford, he uncovered even more unsettling details. Crawford was linked to the rental of several storage units in different cities. Some of these locations had previously been searched in connection to missing persons cases, but no significant evidence had been found. Mike had a gut feeling that something had been missed. Back at the lake house, Ryan returned the following morning, acting as cheerful and attentive as ever. He brought groceries, suggested cooking dinner together, and seemed completely at ease. Olivia decided not to confront him about the documents immediately. She needed more time to think, to gather her thoughts, and perhaps to gather more evidence. But it was difficult to ignore the growing sense of dread. Olivia began noticing small things she hadn't before. The way Ryan avoided answering direct questions about his past, how he deflected conversations about his family or old friends. Her anxiety grew, but she tried to tell herself that she might be overreacting. After all, couldn't there be a reasonable explanation for everything? Meanwhile, the police were quietly building their case. They didn't yet have enough evidence to arrest Ryan, but Mike warned Clara, if he really is who we think he is, he could be dangerous. Tell Olivia to stay cautious. Clara tried to reach Olivia again, but her calls went unanswered. Olivia was determined to handle this on her own. But that night, as she lay in bed next to Ryan, her heart pounding in her chest, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was very, very wrong. Could Ryan truly be hiding something? And if he was, what would happen to her once the truth came out? The police investigation moved swiftly, though it remained hidden from Olivia's knowledge. Detective Mike Randall and his team meticulously analyzed every piece of evidence Clara had provided. Their findings were unsettling. Ryan, or as they now suspected, William Crawford, had rented multiple properties across various cities. One such property was an abandoned warehouse in an industrial area near Chicago. Mike decided to investigate it himself. The warehouse appeared deserted, dust-covered floors, old cardboard boxes, and the musty stench of stale air. But one corner stood out. There was no dust on the floor, and it looked like something had recently been moved. When Mike shifted some boxes aside, what he found shocked him. Items belonging to a woman who had been reported missing over 6 months ago. All signs pointed to Ryan or William Crawford being involved in her disappearance. Mike immediately called Clara. Clara, this guy is dangerous. Tell Olivia to leave that house now, he said, his voice firm and urgent. Clara tried to reach Olivia, but her phone was out of service, which only heightened her sense of dread. At the lake house, everything seemed calm, but the tension between Olivia and Ryan was building. Her gut screamed that something was wrong, and she knew she could no longer ignore the documents she had found. That evening, as Ryan prepared dinner in the kitchen, Olivia decided it was time to confront him. Ryan, she began, trying to keep her voice steady. I found something in your suitcase. Can you explain what these documents mean? Ryan froze for a split second, then calmly placed the knife he was using onto the counter. He turned to her, his face unreadable. What documents? He asked, his tone neutral, though his eyes darkened. Olivia's pulse quickened, but she tried to remain composed. The ones with the name William Crawford, the ones with the lists of women and addresses. I just want to understand, what is this about? Ryan stepped in closer to her, his movement slow and deliberate. His gaze was sharp, calculating. You shouldn't have gone through my things, he said softly, but there was an edge to his voice that sent chills down her spine. Olivia's instincts screamed at her to back away, but she stood her ground. I didn't mean to invade your privacy, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. I just need to know the truth. Ryan's expression didn't change. Let's talk about this tomorrow, he said after a long pause, his tone calm but unnervingly cold. It's late, and you're tired. Olivia nodded hesitantly, realizing she wouldn't get answers tonight. But she also knew she was no longer safe. That night, she barely slept. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. Every creak of the floorboards filled her with dread. At some point in the night, Olivia woke suddenly. Her phone, which she had left on the bedside table, was gone. She quickly realized Ryan had been through her things while she was asleep. Her stomach dropped as she walked into the living room and saw him standing there, holding her phone. On the screen were the photos of the documents she had sent to Clara. What are you looking for? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Ryan didn't answer. He set the phone down on the table and looked at her with an intensity that made her feel like prey. In that moment, Olivia knew she was in grave danger. The next morning, Mike and his team arrived at the lake house, but it was already too late. The front door was slightly ajar, and the faint scent of ozone from the previous night's storm lingered in the air. There was no sign of Olivia. The police found her lifeless body inside the house. The cause of her death was unclear at first, but the scene left no doubt that Ryan had been there. And Ryan himself had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only fear and unanswered questions. The police launched an immediate manhunt, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. Mike knew this case had now become personal. Ryan hadn't just taken an innocent life, he had challenged the very system meant to bring people like him to justice. Olivia's death sent shockwaves through everyone who had known her. Clara Davis was devastated, gripped by an unbearable sense of guilt. She kept replaying the events in her mind, blaming herself. I should have convinced her to leave. I should have done more. No matter how much she tried to reason that she couldn't have foreseen what would happen, the thoughts tormented her. Meanwhile, the police launched a massive investigation. Ryan Gardner, whose real identity had been revealed as William Crawford, had vanished. Detective Mike Randall knew that tracking him down would be no easy task. Crawford was a man of precision, someone who planned his every move. The search intensified, but Ryan seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Clara handed over all the materials she and Olivia had uncovered to Mike. She also shared details about Ryan's behavior, how he seemed to control Olivia's every move, how his actions always appeared too perfect. It was becoming clear that Ryan wasn't just careful. He was a master manipulator who meticulously orchestrated every step of his crimes. As Mike's team analyzed the evidence, they uncovered a disturbing new detail. Ryan had been using forged identities, which made him exceptionally hard to track. Dozens of aliases, fake driver's licenses, passports, and rental agreements pointed to a man who could slip into and out of lives undetected. He was a ghost, leaving behind only faint traces of his presence. A breakthrough came when investigators received a tip about one of Ryan's former hideouts. It was an abandoned warehouse in Los Angeles. When the police searched it, they found remnants of burned documents and a chilling discovery: photos of several women, including Olivia. These weren't just random pictures, they were surveillance photos, proving that Ryan had been stalking his victims for months before making his move. What terrified Clara the most was seeing another familiar face among the photos: a young woman who worked at Clara's law firm. They had collaborated on a few cases together. The realization struck Clara like a lightning bolt. Ryan had not only targeted Olivia, but might also have been watching people connected to her. The fear that Clara had tried so hard to suppress now became overwhelming. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was next. Then came the messages. Anonymous texts started appearing on her phone. "Dear Miss, you know too much. Maybe you should stop digging." Though the police had stationed patrol cars near her house and installed security cameras, Clara felt far from safe. She knew that Ryan wasn't the type to be deterred by such measures. Meanwhile, Mike and his team continued following leads. They discovered that Ryan had used a forged passport to cross into Canada shortly after Olivia's death, but records indicated that he had since returned to the U.S. His movements were unpredictable, and each clue seemed designed to mislead his pursuers. Clara's paranoia deepened with every passing day. She became hyper-aware of her surroundings, jumping at shadows and scrutinizing every unfamiliar face. One evening, she spotted a man in a hooded sweatshirt standing near her house. He lingered for a few minutes before disappearing into the darkness. When the police searched the area, they found nothing. But for Clara, the message was clear. Ryan was nearby, watching, waiting. Mike began to piece together Ryan's pattern. He suspected that Ryan was playing a psychological game, forcing his pursuers to exhaust their resources while he stayed one step ahead. This wasn't just about evading capture, it was about control. Ryan thrived on the fear he left in his wake. The police received another lead. A short-term rental property in Minneapolis had been linked to one of Ryan's aliases. When they searched the house, they found more disturbing evidence: a computer containing detailed notes on potential victims, maps marked with their locations, and lists of their routines. Ryan's level of planning was staggering. But once again, Ryan himself was gone. It was as if he had anticipated their every move, leaving behind just enough evidence to taunt them, but nothing concrete to pinpoint his current location. Clara's life had become a waking nightmare. Despite the heightened security measures, she felt like a prisoner in her own home. Every knock at the door, every ring of her phone filled her with dread. She couldn't escape the thought that Ryan was toying with her, pulling strings from the shadows. Mike knew that Ryan's arrogance and need for control would eventually lead him to make a mistake. But until then, Clara remained his primary target. The stakes were higher than ever, and everyone involved understood one grim truth. Ryan Crawford wouldn't stop until he finished his game. Clara Davis couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She tried to follow the police's advice: stay inside unless accompanied, ignore unknown numbers, and avoid drawing attention to herself. But the anonymous message, "I see you," kept echoing in her mind like an alarm bell. She knew it wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Ryan had entered a new phase of his game, and now she was at the center of it. The police fortified her home with security cameras and patrol cars stationed outside. But Clara knew that wouldn't stop Ryan. He was too clever, too patient. He didn't make mistakes. Ryan had a way of blending in, disappearing into the background. He could be anywhere, even the man walking his dog down the street, and no one would know. Detective Mike Randall worked tirelessly, determined to stay one step ahead of Ryan. He and his team were piecing together every detail of Ryan's movements. They believed he was using abandoned homes and warehouses as temporary hideouts. At one such property in Los Angeles, they found evidence of Ryan's recent presence: burned documents, empty food wrappers, and another chilling clue: a map with Clara's law firm marked on it. This wasn't a coincidence. The police realized Ryan had been tracking Clara for a long time. Her habits, her network, even her daily schedule, it was all likely part of his plan. Mike immediately called Clara. "Clara, you need to stay alert. We've confirmed he's been watching you. Don't take any risks. Do you understand me?" Mike's voice was firm, but Clara could hear the underlying worry. "I understand," she replied, though her heart pounded in her chest. She felt trapped in a game she hadn't agreed to play, with Ryan always several moves ahead. Ryan, meanwhile, had gone completely off the grid. Every lead the police followed seemed to dead end. He avoided security cameras, used untraceable prepaid phones, and left no paper trail. But Clara knew he was still out there, and the growing silence only made her anxiety worse. Another message appeared on her phone: "You can't hide forever." Clara immediately forwarded it to the police, but Ryan had used an anonymous server, leaving them no way to trace it. He was taunting her, and it was working. Mike and his team pressed on, trying to uncover Ryan's next move. They managed to trace him to Minneapolis, where he had rented a short-term property. Inside, they discovered more evidence of his meticulous planning: maps with marked addresses, detailed profiles of women he had been targeting, and Clara's name highlighted at the top of a list. The realization was devastating. Ryan wasn't just toying with her, she was his next victim. For Clara, the fear was becoming unbearable. Even with security measures in place, she felt like a sitting duck. One evening, as she looked out her window, she spotted a man in a dark hoodie standing across the street. He didn't move for several minutes, just stood there watching. When the police searched the area, he was gone, leaving no trace. Clara knew it was Ryan. He was sending her a message: "I'm close." Mike realized that Ryan's fixation on Clara might be the key to catching him. His need for control and his arrogance were weaknesses they could exploit. But as much as Mike tried to reassure Clara, she couldn't escape the constant dread. She barely slept, her nights filled with nightmares of Ryan finding her, breaking into her home, and finishing what he'd started with Olivia. The police ramped up their search, focusing on Ryan's known aliases and past hideouts. They found more fragments of his plans: a burned computer hard drive, surveillance photos, and partially destroyed notes. But Ryan himself remained elusive. Clara knew she couldn't stay locked away forever, but the thought of stepping outside filled her with terror. Every shadow seemed like Ryan's, every noise a sign he was near. Despite the security measures, Clara felt more vulnerable than ever. Mike tried to reassure her. "Ryan's playing a dangerous game. He's taking risks by coming after you. That's how we'll catch him." But Clara wasn't convinced. She knew Ryan was always in control, and she couldn't help but feel that no matter how close the police got, Ryan was always one step ahead. The police worked around the clock. Detective Mike Randall knew they weren't just chasing a cunning criminal. They were racing against time. Ryan Crawford, a man with a talent for vanishing into thin air, seemed unstoppable. But this time, Mike believed they had an advantage. Ryan's arrogance. His need for control and his obsession with Clara meant he would return. Ryan wasn't just trying to escape, he wanted to finish his game. Clara, however, didn't share Mike's confidence. She lived in a constant state of fear, feeling like a pawn in Ryan's twisted game. The anonymous messages hadn't stopped. The most recent one read, "You can't hide from me." Clara forwarded it to Mike, but once again Ryan had used an untraceable method, his ability to stay hidden while making his presence felt left. Clara paralyzed with dread. Mike had a plan. He believed Ryan's obsession with Clara could be turned against him. The team set up a trap at Clara's house, transforming it into a fortress. Security cameras, motion sensors, and microphones were installed, and undercover officers were stationed nearby, ready to act at the first sign of danger. A SWAT team stood by, prepared for a confrontation. Clara's house became a nerve center of police activity, but for her, it felt more like a prison. She felt like a target, a piece of bait in the middle of a deadly game. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light made her heart race. The tension was unbearable. 3 days passed with no sign of Ryan. But then, in the dead of night, the cameras picked up movement. A man in dark clothing approached the house cautiously, scanning the surroundings as though ensuring he wasn't being watched. He moved methodically, inching closer to the front door. It was him. Mike's team watched as Ryan disabled one of the exterior cameras with calculated precision. His movements were deliberate, almost surgical. He was careful, but his confidence in his own abilities was apparent. He believed no one could stop him. Ryan made his way inside the house, moving silently like a predator, stalking its prey. Clara sat in her bedroom, pretending to read, while every nerve in her body screamed with fear. She knew the police were watching, but the thought of Ryan being so close sent chills down her spine. Ryan was heading toward her room when the police made their move. The SWAT team burst into the house, their shouts breaking the eerie silence. Ryan tried to flee, but the officers were faster. Within seconds, he was tackled to the ground and restrained. Mike entered the house moments later to confirm the operation was a success. Ryan's face remained eerily calm, his expression devoid of fear or anger. His cold eyes locked onto Clara as he was led out of the house in handcuffs. The way he stared at her felt like a warning, a promise that this wasn't over. Clara emerged from her room, shaking from head to toe. Relief and fear mingled in her chest as she saw Ryan being escorted out. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe, but only for a moment. Ryan's unflinching gaze as he was taken away left her unsettled. The police began searching the house for any evidence Ryan might have left behind. Though they had captured him, Mike knew the battle wasn't over. Ryan was a master manipulator, and even in custody, he could still pose a threat. As Clara stood in her living room watching the aftermath of Ryan's arrest, she realized one horrifying truth. This wasn't the end of her nightmare. Ryan had been stopped, but the scars he left behind would remain. His final words to the officers, spoken just loud enough for Clara to hear as they escorted him to the car, echoed in her mind. "I'll see you again." Mike tried to reassure Clara. "He's not going anywhere. We'll make sure of it." But she couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, Ryan still had the upper hand. 2 months had passed since Ryan Crawford's arrest, but the fear he had planted in Clara Davis's life hadn't faded. Ryan was being held in custody, awaiting trial while the police worked tirelessly to compile the evidence needed to convict him. Detective Mike Randall poured himself into the case, knowing this might be their only chance to ensure such a dangerous man was locked away for good. Despite the arrest, no one felt a sense of closure. Ryan had refused to cooperate during interrogations. He denied everything, his demeanor eerily calm, as if he were untouchable. His lawyer, hired with funds from an unknown source, argued that the evidence against him was circumstantial at best. Without concrete proof or direct confession, the case might not hold up in court. Mike knew the lawyer wasn't wrong. While the burned documents, photographs, and other items they had recovered were disturbing, They didn't definitively tie Ryan to the disappearances of the women on the list. The strongest evidence was Clara's testimony, but Ryan's lawyer was already working to discredit her, suggesting her claims were biased due to her personal involvement. Clara tried to stay strong, but she was struggling. The memories of that night when Ryan had entered her house haunted her constantly. She couldn't shake the feeling of his gaze, the cold, calculated way he had stalked her. Even with him behind bars, she couldn't feel truly safe. His words, his presence, they lingered like a shadow she couldn't escape. And then, the unthinkable happened. During a routine transfer to a different facility, Ryan escaped. The news broke early in the morning and Clara woke to the sound of her phone ringing incessantly. It was Mike. His voice was tense, urgent. "Clara, he's gone. Ryan escaped during the transfer." Her world shattered. The fragile sense of safety she'd begun to rebuild crumbled in an instant. Ryan was free again, and she knew he would come for her. The police immediately heightened security around Clara, but she couldn't suppress the overwhelming fear that Ryan was already ahead of them. Mike and his team launched an intensive manhunt. They retraced Ryan's known movements, revisited his hideouts, and scoured every lead they could find. But as before, Ryan proved to be a ghost. He had left no trace. It was as if he had simply disappeared. For Clara, life became unbearable. She left her law practice, moved to a different state, and tried to start over. But the fear followed her. Every time she saw a man in a crowd wearing a hood, every time she heard footsteps behind her on a quiet street, she thought it was Ryan. At night, she dreamed of him, standing at the foot of her bed, his cold eyes watching her. Mike, too, felt the weight of failure. He had spent months chasing Ryan, only to lose him again. Despite working other cases, he couldn't let go of this one. Ryan Crawford wasn't just a criminal, he was a predator, someone who thrived on the fear and chaos he created. And Mike knew Ryan wouldn't stay hidden forever. As weeks turned into months, Ryan's name stopped appearing in police reports. There were no new sightings, no fresh leads. Some believed he might have left the country, while others thought he was lying low, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Clara, however, was certain of one thing. Ryan wasn't done. He wasn't the type to simply disappear and start a new life. He thrived on the power he held over his victims. And even if he was quiet now, she knew he was out there, watching, waiting. Mike shared her fears. He had studied men like Ryan before, master manipulators, skilled at blending in, with the patience to wait for years before making their next move. Ryan's escape wasn't the end of the story, it was just another chapter. And so, life went on, but the shadow of Ryan Crawford loomed large over everyone he had touched. Clara tried to rebuild her life, but she could never shake the feeling that she was still part of his game. She knew that as long as he was out there, she could never truly be free. And somewhere in the darkness, Ryan Crawford was waiting. His story wasn't over. It never would be, not until he decided it was.